My brothers and sisters, this is the proclamation of the Holy Gospel as we find in the tradition of St. Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
At that time, Jesus came to Jericho and intended to pass through the town. Now there was a man named Zacchaeus, who was the chief tax collector and also a very wealthy man, was seeking to see who Jesus was. But he could not see him because of the crowd, for he was short of stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree in order to see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. When Jesus reached the place, Jesus looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus, come down quickly, for today I must stay in your house." And he came down quickly and received him with joy. When they all saw this, they began to grumble, saying, "He is gone to stay in the house of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Behold, half of my possessions, Lord, I give to the poor, and if I have ever extorted anyone, I shall repay them 4 times over." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a descendant of Abraham. For the Son of Man comes to seek and to save that which was lost." My brothers and sisters, this is the good news of our salvation.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I'm sure we're all familiar with this story. We've heard it any number of times. We've seen things enacted by the actors and maybe in a film or something. So this story does not come to us as a big surprise. A man named Zacchaeus wants to see who Jesus is. He's heard about this man. Now Jericho is not that far from Jerusalem, but remember, people didn't travel all that much in those days. It was not easy to travel. The roads were rough. They were littered with highwaymen and brigands and robbers, as we found out by that poor Samaritan, that poor guy who got caught with the robbers on the road to Jericho. And the Samaritan helped him in his plight. Be that as it may, we have this story set out to us, and we have this guy, Zacchaeus. Now, he says he's short in stature. We have to realize, anthropologically, in the day of Jesus, a man was only about 5'5". All right? That's the size right. You go to stand up and be okay? So, he's 5'5", 5'6". And we don't see any real height, and that's why when even later on, in much later times, when the Vandals and the Visigoths and the North people came down into Rome, they were like, these are giants, only because of the fact that Romans were still small. And these guys were towering over themselves by 6 feet. But be that as it may, Zacchaeus was even shorter than that. So we can imagine, here's this guy who's probably standing maybe 5 on a good day. All right? And he runs down and he climbs a sycamore tree. Now, how many people do you remember as you're watching a parade in New York City on Thanksgiving Day that people are hanging off the lampposts? Right? I want to get a good view of what's going on. And so they're climbing lampposts, they're climbing parts of the building that they can cling onto. People are hanging out over the balconies. People are staring out the windows. They want to see what's going on. They want to get a good picture of this parade. And Zacchaeus is no different. But because of his stature, he can't, even if he tried to jump. So he figures, let me run ahead of the crowd, climb this sycamore tree, and I'll get a good view of what's happening, of this person, Jesus. In the beginning of our Mass this afternoon, I mentioned about the changing seasons. And here in Florida, as we well know, we don't have that change of seasons that we are accustomed to if we are from the north. And so one month flies into another and segues into another, and we have to really have a calendar in hand to keep what month is this? If it wasn't for the fact that people are talking about Halloween, I would forget that this is October. If it wasn't for the fact that Thanksgiving is coming next month, I would forget it's November. Because October and November are very much like January and February. And so what makes it different? In those areas where we have the drastic change of weather, the seasons are our time clock. The seasons become our clock as to how time moves on. And this is very much so in Palestine. In Jerusalem, there are those changes of seasons. When I was there, it snowed in January because we're in the mountains, you're in the hills. So to get warm, we would go down to Jericho. We would go down to the Dead Sea, where it was maybe 50 degrees difference. And so when we're talking about this man Zacchaeus, he was a man he was wealthy. He was the chief tax collector in Jericho. And he understood everything that was going on in his business. He had his thumb on the pulse of his society. But something happened. Something happened between the time he climbed that tree and when Jesus came under the tree. Something happened. There was a seasonal change of heart. Now, we don't see him interacting with Jesus. We don't see Jesus posing any theological points about being poor and giving to the poor. We don't see a dialogue taking place between him, Zacchaeus, and the Pharisees. We don't see that. It didn't happen. All he said was, Zacchaeus, come down. I mean to stay in your house today. All of a sudden, something happened to this man. Something changed in this man, because when he came down, he didn't say, well, thank you very much, I appreciate it, you're more than welcome, you come in, we'll have a party. He said to him, behold, I give half of my possessions to the poor. Right off the bat. Half of what I own is going to the poor. And if I have extorted any monies from anybody, which was the common way the tax collector made their money, I will pay them back 4 times. So by the time Zacchaeus, when he went up the tree and came down the tree, something took place in this man. What was it? What was it? Did he see Jesus working a miracle? Was he touched by the fervor of the crowd? We don't know. But some conversion, some change took place in this man that changed him not just for that day, but for the rest of his life. For the rest of his life. And we say that because of the fact today, 2,000 plus years later, Zacchaeus is still remembered. Zacchaeus is still remembered because of what happened to him. That conversion that took place in his life. In our own lives, we have to admit that we do feel that conversion process. We encounter someone, we hear a sermon, we read something, we hear whatever it is, something enters into our being, into our psyche, into our soul, into our heart, and all of a sudden I begin to realize that I have truly been going down the wrong path. I have not been true to myself, much less to my God. And I have to see that there is something that must change. I have to change my life if I am to live. It's very much like an individual who was diagnosed with a terrible disease. And the doctor says, I'm sorry, but this is what you have, and to continue a life, you have to change your ways. You have to stop eating this, or you have to start eating that, and you can't do this, and you have to do that. And so you take that information and you walk away and say, okay, I now have a choice. Do I live my life as best I can under the circumstances by making those changes that I must make? Or do I continue my life and cut it short? Zacchaeus decided at that moment that his life had to change because of this encounter with the Lord. And because of that, he was able to stand in front of the entire town and say, I give half of my possessions to the poor. Now, if I have defrauded anyone here, I pay you back 4 times. That conversion took place. We don't know what happens to Zacchaeus afterwards. They may have had a nice party at his house, and the Lord would have continued his journey to wherever he was going, and Zacchaeus would be standing on the road watching the crowd walk away. But is it the same Zacchaeus that climbed the sycamore tree? No. He was changed. He was converted. He saw the light. He came to faith. And from that moment on, Zacchaeus led a different life because of this encounter with this person, Jesus. But sometimes we, in our conversion process, slip backwards. We have a tendency to go back to that same old. Not because it's better, but because it's familiar. There is no challenge in the familiar. There is no change in the familiar. I do what I do every day because it is familiar. And I'm comfortable. Do I know that I have to change? Oh, sure. I know I have to stop smoking. I know I have to take a walk every day. I know that I can't do this or that and the other thing. Do I want to? Well, yeah, but it's too difficult. And so we find many times that this conversion process, I'm full with joy and prospect, and there's nothing like an ex-smoker, they say. There's nothing like an ex-smoker. Or a newly converted Christian. That will drive you nuts. Because they know everything, right from the bat. But many times we find these people several years down the road very much like they were, if not worse than before their conversion. So, my brothers and sisters, we take this example of little Zacchaeus. Small in stature, but big of heart. He made a decision and he stuck to it. He made a promise, not just to himself and the Lord in private, but to the entire town. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to change my life because I have encountered the Lord. And every day we encounter the Lord. Unfortunately, we don't recognize him. Unfortunately, we don't recognize him because we're too busy. We're looking for the fantastic. We're looking for the spectacular. We're looking for the miraculous. The light that shines in the darkness. The tremble of the earth under our feet. The wind that blows and rips sycamore trees from their roots. The cacophony, the theophany of God making himself present in the world by power and might. That's what bends the knee. To hear the voice of a child laughing, to see the innocence of a newborn, to hear the cry of the poor, to rejoice in the joy of others. That's where we meet the Lord. That's where we meet the Lord. in the everyday. In the everyday. Zacchaeus got up that morning and didn't realize what was going to happen to him because of his curiosity. He was changed. Maybe we need to wake up in the morning with a little curiosity. What's going to happen if I have oatmeal for breakfast rather than 3 or 4 eggs and a pound of bacon? Am I going to feel better? Well, maybe not tomorrow morning, but maybe down the road you will. Am I going to wake up and not have that spark, that adventure? Because if I don't, then I become ordinary and I go through my routine and I do what I do. Not because it's exciting, because it's familiar. And so, we have to remember the familiar is good. Gives us that lifeline to hold on to as we walk into the uncertain future. But we also have to realize that we need to walk into the future and leave the past behind. Because that's where we encounter the Lord. Not back there, but out there. Out there with our brothers and sisters. That's where we become the image of Christ to people who have lost hope. We become the image of Christ to people who have lost their way. We become the image of Christ who have burdened the sadness of years. We are the image of Christ that enables people to say, Lord, I have to change my life. Whatever I have, I give to the poor. And if I've hurt anybody, I pay them back 4 times.